What you're looking at is a prototype I've been working on. It's a concept for a creative community to share their work that never made it to production. I wanted to challenge myself though and not use any images and lean more into typography, graphics, and custom animations. I started in Affinity though, a tool that most web designers wouldn't jump to first. But using that is how this all came together. I'm gonna walk you through the full workflow, how I used Affinity to storyboard all the scenes, and how I used Figma to pull it all together and animate them. I'm also gonna show you a wall that I hit with Smart Animate and what I did to get around it. So let's start at the beginning. So I start this first phase in Affinity only because when I open Figma, my brain starts to automatically think in components, variables, and UI elements. And that works well when I'm trying to create something functional. But for a site like this, where I'm trying to create something a little more creative, my brain just works better when I start in Affinity. I think part of it is because Affinity is a drawing tool, a graphic design tool, and I'm trying to think more like a graphic designer when I approach a site like this. I approach it more like a storyboard, and I'm designing each scene in the story individually, so I can focus on each individual moment and what it looks like when it stands on its own. Since this site is a concept for a community to share their work in progress, I wanted the design to have a little bit of that, to have that blueprint feel and feel like it was a little bit of a work in progress. So that's why you see I left some of these grid lines throughout, and I'm using some of these illustrations to mimic something like a blueprint. And I think that's why not using photos also helps with this concept. So even though each section is designed individually, I was still keeping it in the back of my mind how I wanted one section to transition into the next. And that's why I like stacking the boards vertically like this, so I can start getting an idea of how I would transition from one scene into the next. So let me show you how I make those transitions happen in the next step. So once the storyboard scenes are done, I start migrating those into Figma. And this is where I start getting a feel for the pacing of the page. One of the first things I do is I end up using the same column and row grid that I have set up in Affinity. So you can see this is what it looks like. And this just helps me align everything in Figma the same way I had it set up in Affinity. And this usually goes by pretty quick. So these first 4 frames that I have are just a stripped away version without the graphics, because I just want to get a feel for the prototype here. So I start with a pretty simple prototype and just have a click on each section that's showing me the transitions from one section into another. And then I just have this drag up feature to go back. So this is just helping me get a feel for what it's like going from section to section, whether you're going down or scrolling back up. Another thing worth mentioning here is when you start doing the animation between your frames is you have to have your layers exist in both frames, and they need to be named the same thing so that the Smart Animate knows how to connect those two, because Smart Animate is just working by getting your layer from point A to point B, and it just fills everything in between. So having the layers exist in both scenes and name the same thing is what makes the animation connect through Smart Animate. So getting this first draft created means that I can now start bringing in graphics and fine-tuning some of these animations, which I'll show you in the next step. So once I have that first draft finished out, this is where I start bringing in the graphics from Affinity. And the nice thing about Affinity is that you can copy and paste into Figma, and it will keep all your layer names and groups intact, so you don't have to rebuild that in Figma. And when you bring those over, they're still editable vectors in Figma. One thing you'll notice here that's different is that there's more artboards added. And these are just some in-between states so that I could control the animation a little better when it goes from scene to scene. And they kind of act as like an additional keyframe. It's not what it really is, but that's just kind of how I think about it. But it just helps give me a little more control of the animations when I'm going from scene to scene. Where I ended up hitting a wall was on the second scene, because the way I wanted this graphic to animate was I wanted these gears to continuously loop and keep turning. And with auto animate, you're just going from scene to scene, so it's only animating once. So my workaround for that was to go ahead and break apart that illustration and create component sets for each element individually so that I could animate each one independently, because I wanted all of these to animate at different speeds. And what you're seeing here is just the different states of the animation. Even though they look the same, this is at 0 degrees, this is 90, 180, and 270, and same with the gear under here. And this pump here is just going between these two states. And because I want these all animated at different speeds, I could do that here individually and then bring them back into my prototype as individual components. So you'll see here, these are just components, and I just assemble them in the layout here and group them. So these are going to loop independently now, and it's completely separate from my auto animate from scene to scene. So let's take a look at what the final result looks like. So this is the finished prototype. Every section and every transition, the gear icons looping the way I originally wanted them to. And the whole thing came together by creating the look in Affinity, but applying the feel in Figma. And the storyboard approach changed how I used both tools. So designing scene by scene in Affinity shifted how I think in Figma also, because I wasn't just building a page anymore, I was staging a sequence. This workflow isn't how you should approach every page in every design, and it isn't for everyone. Some people can do this all in Figma and do it well. For me, using Affinity is about getting in a different creative headspace, because when I jump right into Figma, I'm thinking in UI patterns and components. And for this project, I wanted to get more creative because I thought it mattered more, which is why I chose Affinity to start. The storyboard approach, designing one artboard per section and creating animations to transition between them seamlessly, is how I approach design if I'm trying to have the user experience the story in a more creative way. So if you're trying to tell a story on your page, or you're stuck creatively, it might be worth breaking it apart and designing by scene instead of by page.